Good day everyone. The topic of this video, reincarnation, is highly important. In light of this, I urge you to watch the whole video, because I provide some proof which researchers may follow to confirm that I indeed have some reflections, similarities, synchronicities, and also identical spiritual knowledge with the actress Vivian Leigh. And they will also be able to confirm that I was either living or suffering in situations in life which very closely match the situations in which Vivian Leigh made errors. This will be a huge step to proving that I'm at least telling the truth about these connections. If I wasn't 100% sure I was Vivian Leigh in one of my past lives, I wouldn't be making this video. And I'm well aware of what many of modern people will think of such a statement. A book called Saleable Prophecy has played a major role in my life, and I know from many experiences and research it is a true book. I've talked about that in my other videos and also in my free ebook Simple Truths of Life. And if you need the proof I'm telling the truth about my experiences, then you can watch my telekinesis video. The fact that I've learned to do this thing, which is considered by many modern people to be science fiction, should tell you a lot. I got the confirmation that I was Michele Avila awesome. But for the simplicity and shortness of this current video, I'll be talking about the connections between my Vivian Leigh life and my current life only. Having found many synchronicities with Michele Avila and Vivian Leigh, I did not know that reincarnation was the reason behind them. I only saw it as an option. And in my thoughts, I thought that while that experience was very interesting and unusual, I could have been anyone else in my past lives. What are the chances that one would find his two past lives just like that on the internet? In fact, this idea reflects what I told myself before I went to sleep on the 3rd of September. That night, on September 4th, after 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up from a dream in which I was at some type of past life regression. And the question was asked who I was in my past life. And all of a sudden I started to speak in 40-year-old Vivian Leigh's voice, saying, "But I already know the answer. I was the actress Vivian Leigh." I've had multiple dreams since then, reconfirming that I was Vivian Leigh in my past life. It's important to say that I would ask my higher self to give me some answers about my past lives via dreams. And it did. In one such dream, I saw a photo of Vivian Leigh after asking my higher self to show the photo of me in my past life if I lived in 1785. In another dream, I heard myself say in Scarlett O'Hara's voice, "All right." After I asked my higher self if it was possible to view a glimpse of my past life of Vivian Leigh. I'll talk about other dreams in my video about my past life of Michele Avila. And you can also read about them from my diary, which I'll share with you at the end. Later I'd realize it's not about chances. Each action and decision has a consequence. Errors lead people to unavoidable suffering, in the current life or in some other life. It follows then that our good decisions lead us to receiving benefits, which we may also get in another life. So, it's not surprising that life can guide us to our past incarnations, if it's what we have to discover in our current life. Apparently, this is what have happened to me, and as I continued to discover more and more about my past lives, it started to become more clear why this had to happen. I started seeing new synchronicities with Vivian Leigh, and shortly after I remembered about true dreams and that they can tell us our actual past life. I knew if I was Vivian, then there is a way to prove it by finding her errors linked to my suffering. We would also have similar psychology, since I've lived that life not so long ago. And Psyche, being part of astral body, doesn't die. I decided to watch more movies with Vivian, and in Waterloo Bridge I saw the almost exact reflection in the scene with Kitty, and then with the bridge corresponding to the one episode from my life with prostitute Natasha. This is where I knew I was actually Vivian Leigh, and my dream was a true dream. In the movie, Vivian's character Myra finds out that her friend Kitty had become a prostitute. Shortly after, Myra decides to do the same to survive. It's shown that she has been doing it for the whole winter at least. In my case with Natasha, she told me her friend had become a prostitute first, and then Natasha had to join her because she couldn't find work and her money had run out. She'd been doing it for the whole of winter. For 6 months, in fact. Both Natasha and Myra were unfairly fired by their bosses. Much later, I found another smaller reflection in that movie, with the same episode from my life. It concerns Roy, who wants to see Myra again, but there are issues with the note. He decides to leave, but then Myra's friend Kitty runs out and says Myra wants to meet him. They do meet later. In my case, I wanted to see Natasha again for the second time, because I wanted to help her, but there were issues delivering my request to see her. I was about to leave when a girl, who might have been Natasha's friend, came in and, having realized what was happening, ran to bring Natasha in. We did meet again. Then I also remembered that I was falling in love with Natasha during the same day that I saw her. I realized upon second viewing of Waterloo Bridge that Myra and Roy fell for one another in one day also. After this finding, I watched all movies with Vivian Leigh, in search of new connections. I did find several, and it's quite possible that after learning the details of my other lives, I could find even more reflections. I've noticed that I seem to have suffered for some of the errors of the characters that I played in my Vivian life. At the very least, there are similarities between those scenes and my life. For now, I think that maybe the characters people play should pay for their errors so that the actor doesn't have to pay the penalty himself. If I'm correct, the reason may be in the fact that movies and plays are influencing people. And so, if the message is wrong, then it may make some people who watched it decide to make the same erroneous decision in their life, causing suffering to themselves or to someone else. Gone with the Wind. Scarlett realizing she doesn't love Ashley, and then her returning to Tara, which signifies her coming of age. That is reflected in me realizing I don't truly want to go to live abroad, and I'm okay living where I am. Then I started going to my village, which I didn't visit for many years. When I first watched Gone with the Wind in English several years ago, I didn't know that I was Vivian Leigh yet. The connection was still very noticeable. In fact, this movie and Scarlett's arc moved me so much that I thought it could help me live my life more peacefully. And it did actually help me for a while. At about 2 hours 22 minutes and 30 seconds into the movie, there's a close-up shot of a check for $300, which Scarlett got after marrying Frank Kennedy, by lying to him about her sister. The date of the check is 20th February. On 20th February 2020, I was almost scammed and cheated at a highly important moment of my life, when I tried to publish my official translation of Celeb Prophecy. The publishing company's employee, Mikhail, gave me a different contract to sign after I read the original, which had no obvious issues. Thankfully, the signed contract was illegal, and so I managed to get them to destroy the copies of the contract. In Alexander Walker's biography of Vivian, there are mentions of contracts situations, showing that Vivian made an error. Of note is the date December 20th, 1938. But then Walker also writes that Vivian was actually brought to court. So, as Vivian, I did suffer somewhat for that error. And maybe this might explain why I got out of my current wife's contract situation quickly if that was a suffering for my past wife's error. Then Mother writes about my mischievousness in her diary. I was about 1.5 years then. She writes that I'd demand something, cry and wince, while looking with one eye. What is the reaction like? That reminded me so much of Scarlett O'Hara at 2 hours 24 minutes into the movie. Of course, it also reminded me of how it was said that during the production of A Young at Oxford, my antics were seemingly paying dividends. That Hamilton woman. The dead face. In the beginning of the movie, the older Lady Hamilton talks about the dead face. I know it. I knew that face. For 10 years it looked back at me from different mirrors. Must be me. But I always wait for the miracle. That one time, just once, can't make out. It will be another face that looks at me again. A face I knew before, but that face must be dead. This was exactly what I had been experiencing for some days, after I realized that I must have been Vivian Leigh after all. Whenever I looked at Vivian Leigh in photos or videos, it was literally the face that I knew before, from my past life as Vivian Leigh. And since I now live another life in a new physical body, that face is dead. On top of that, I try to use mirrors in my dreams and lucid dreams, in order to see the physical bodies which I had in my past lives. The ending of Life theme is present in 4 movies with Vivian, and I had so far exactly 4 episodes in which I thought about that same thing rather seriously. The movies are Waterloo Bridge, Anna Karenina, The Deep Blue Sea, and The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. And while watching The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, there was a very special synchronicity. At about 46 minutes and 41 seconds into the movie, for some reason attached with the fingers of my left hand my lower jaw. And as I was doing it, at exactly the same time, and at the same speed and manner, the character I played, Karen Stone, also touched the exact same spot with the fingers of the left hand on her face. I rarely touch my face and not in this manner. That movie also mentions and implies a cut throat. I've had 3 dreams in which my throat was cut. One had theater, another had blue car which looked similar to camera, but it could have been something else. In the 3rd dream I was on a city square. Also, I had a somewhat prophetic dream about 2 people with slit throats. I was called dog, pes, by 2 of my village friends because of my stutter. I was not at all surprised to see the dog theme present in 2 of Vivian Leigh's movies, just as I was not surprised to see very close resemblances to what I had to experience in my life in those scenes. In Look Up and Love movie, the boyfriend of Vivian Leigh's character, played by Tommy Fields, is stammering. In one of the scenes his speech resembles highly well my speech, which I had in school when I couldn't speak normally. The other important detail is the fact that in the movie Tommy says he's lost a lot of money on the dogs. I will also note that Tommy's appearance at one point reminded me of the appearance of the same guy from the village, who was the first to call me the above mentioned word. And I have also noticed more than once that at some points in my past lives my appearance was similar to that of people whom I knew in my current life. These facts do not surprise me much, since it makes it possible to experience life from a different point of view, to experience life on the other side of the barricades, so to speak. And this is one of the reasons for the existence of reincarnation. And in Storm in a Teacup, the dogs play the major role now in the story. I play in Vivian Leigh's wife, the daughter of a local politician in Scotland, who tries to break the reporter who wrote a negative story about him. At one point, the army of dogs storms into the house of that politician, and the chaos begins. People find out about the incident, and during the politician's speech, they ridicule him by making dog sounds. When I was watching that scene, I remember well how immediately I knew that they do it in the almost exact way the 2 guys from my village did. So the question is, what did I do wrong to have stammer in this life? Maybe the line I say in the movie Look Up and Love, I like him tongue-tied, could be of some connection. But I doubt it's the main reason, because that line has at least 2 interpretations. One of which simply means that she likes him the way he is, and she doesn't mind his stammer. At the moment of making this video, I've read 2 biographies about my past life in Vivian Leigh's body, and I've also read a lot of articles. On one hand, I am sad that I found nothing which would show me the exact error I made, which resulted in me having to deal with stammer in this current life at the early age. But on the other hand, I've found some hints. One of them has to do with the fact that the critic Ken Steinen, who used to write negative reviews about Vivian Leigh, had stammer. I know that I was sharp-tongued in Vivian Leigh's life, and it's more than possible that in that life I said something bad about Kenneth and his stammer after reading one of his bad reviews. But there's more. Recently I've got confirmation that I was Emma Hamilton also, meaning that I played myself in Lady Hamilton movie. It's a long separate story. And what's important right now is the fact that in Emma's life there was a moment when I treated badly a stammering painter whose name was Guy Head. This led me to have a theory that maybe sometimes different errors in our different lives can result in one major suffering, meaning they add up just like two meeting waves peaks will result in a large peak. The skin of our teeth. Her asking the question about improving the world. In her role as resident pessimist, lacking vision, Sabina says, "That's all we do, always beginning again, over and over again, always beginning again. After each disaster, they just rebuild the world again." She also says, "Don't forget that a few years ago, we came through the depression by the skin of our teeth. One more tight squeeze like that, and where will we be?" And later she says, "My nerves can't stand it, but if you have any ideas about improving this crazy old world, I'm really with you. I really am." I've been trying to share Selbu Prophecy book for many years. I was also fortunate enough to make official Russian translation of the book. Since I know for a fact from my own experiences and experimentations that the book is true, and its knowledge is very important to all people, because it can help the whole of humanity greatly. I'd say that I have several ideas on how to improve the world now. And I actually mentioned them in the manifesto chapter of my free ebook Simple Truths of Life. Since my early childhood, I liked watching movies and probably have watched all significant films since the day of cinema birth. I have never encountered any reflections in any movies until I started watching movies with Vivian Leigh. This proves that this experience is of no coincidence. There are also at least two reflections and also synchronicities with the life of Michele Avila, but I'll talk about that in another video. According to the universal law, we have to suffer for all of our mistakes. I knew that if my dream was true and I was indeed the actress Vivian Leigh, then I would find many connections between her and me while reading biographies about the actress. Of course, the situations in our lives are influenced by many factors, and the situation in which we suffer as the consequence of our past mistake doesn't have to be 100% identical to the situation in which we made that mistake. Nevertheless, if you know that you probably was that person, chances are that you will spot a direct link. You watching this video means that I did find a lot of links between the errors I made in my Vivian Leigh's life and different types of suffering that I had to endure in this current life. I've already mentioned the stammer. Due to various reasons, I was not able to find a girlfriend. I have no family of my own. I wasn't surprised to learn that Vivian Leigh slept with other women's men. Even if the illness caused the elevated sex drive, resulting in the aforementioned facts, it was still an error. There's evidence Lee Holman, Vivian's first husband, was suffering the abandonment, and since in Vivian's life I never experienced living without anyone by my side, it seems like I must pay the penalty for those mistakes in my current life. I've had problems having sleep during quite a large amount of time in my current life. One of reasons had to do with the neighbors upstairs engaging in loud adult activities. Aside from the woman's screams, their bed also would hit the walls very hard, making huge noise. It just so happens Scotty Bowers wrote in his book Full Service that Vivian Leigh screamed while the two of them were engaged in the same activity as my neighbors were. And he mentioned before that they needed to be silent because George Cooker was sleeping. Scotty writes that Vivian wailed deliriously. I don't care if George hears us. I just don't care. My neighbors upstairs clearly didn't care either about other people. At the time, living without a girlfriend and with all the problems I had to face, it was difficult to hear and realize someone has what you desire but seemingly can't have. Then, several biographies of Vivian Leigh mention how I in that life would, unfortunately, deprive Oliver of sleep. Larry himself, in his Confessions of an Actor, said he had lack of sleep due to all the partying. The major reason I had serious issues with sleep had to do with the air conditioners of Sberbank attached to the wall near our windows. They also had iron mesh covering them too tightly, and that resulted in the air conditioners making huge amount of noise. They were working from 7 a.m. till the late evening, or even night, and sometimes the air conditioners would be left working during the whole night too. The noise and lack of sleep almost killed me then, but then the issue was found and resolved. Since then, Sberbank moved to another place, but the noise issue still continues, from neighbors and from other equipment, which is probably in the basement. Tamara Chinarova only briefly mentions Vivian in her book, and yet the episode she described revealed several interconnections between my old life and the new one. In fact, the three of them were written by her in the same sentence. Tamara wrote about Vivian's visit to hers and Peter's apartment, and then mentioned how Vivian complained their flat was too stuffy, opened a few of their drawers to inspect the contents, and finally commented on their cheap curtain linings. Stuffy room. A woman from Roskomnadzor said my room was stuffy when they came to measure the noise made by the bank's air conditioners. Opening and inspecting other people's drawers. Then, when I was about 15 years old, a policeman, along with a woman, who might have been his girlfriend because of her casual clothes, came out of the blue to my apartment. I was home alone at the time. At one point, that policeman opened the door to our bathroom without asking permission. He just looked inside, inspecting the contents. Both of them smiled at the sight of us having an issue with the toilet tank, which was open and a wooden stick had to prevent the mechanisms from letting the water in until the repairs were done. Curtains. When we were kids, my friend Anton visited our apartment once. For some reason, he decided to mention our curtains. More precisely, the fact that we close them at night. And I think, if I remember correctly, he then mentioned that fact to someone else because somehow it was a funny thing to say in his mind. We live close to the ground floor, and so when the darkness comes and we turn on the light, we have to close our curtains so that people from the street don't see what's inside. They lived on the 7th floor, where there was no need for such privacy. We were kids and maybe he just didn't know the purpose of curtains. One episode in my Vivian Leigh life had led me to 3 separate events in my current life. I actually can't remember if there was other events when somebody would mention something about my apartment or village house. These events of 2 lives seem to be direct matches, given the whole context, including the true dreams. Then Tamar mentioned Vivian's manic depression and how Vivian cut up all her clothes. I remember a situation in my current life when my winter jacket was cut by a knife. My school peers brought that to my attention. We quarreled with my mother days earlier, and I think that it was her who cut it. It leads us to Tamara mentioning how Vivian tried to attack her with a knife. During the same school period I just mentioned, my mother did try to do the same. That period of quarrels is long over, and we live more or less peacefully now. Then Tamara mentioned several other details about what I tried to do in my past life, but that time to myself. I will not mention them, but I'll say that the window of the 9th floor did appear in my mind before I found out the cause for stuttering, which dissipated that idea and helped me start changing my life. The taking of certain amount of drugs also had a reflection in a situation with my mother. And the mention of the water-related attempt did remind me of how I died in my wife of Michele Avila. Then Tamara mentions how Vivian laughed at her appearance, the length of her nose in particular. Later, Tamara writes she underwent a cosmetic surgery because of that. I have several problems with my current physical body's appearance, and I've suffered quite a lot because of them. One of those issues has to do with my nose. Vivian slept with Peter Finch, Tamara's husband. Tamara and Peter had a daughter, Anita. They eventually divorced because of the affair, which ironically came to an end after the divorce too. Tamara never remarried. Once again, I see a reason why I have to live alone without anyone by my side in my life. They say that Vivian beat one police officer on the finger. If I didn't pay for that error in my past life, then this could be one of the reasons I've had negative interactions with police in my current life. Also, when we were kids, my friend's dog bit me 2 times on my leg, but this episode might be the suffering for the error I did in another episode of my Vivian's life. As a kid, Vivian beat her mother Gertrude on the leg, when playing a line a bit too realistically. Alexander Walker wrote how, one night during a party, Lily Palmer wished to go to bed because she went to bed late the previous night. Vivian agreed, but apparently, she found it to be a lame excuse to retire while they were all enjoying themselves so much. I remember how when we were making a bonfire near our village, I would go early to sleep, and I remember how 2 girlfriends whispered something to themselves as I was walking off. Vivian, in one of her letters home, compared the Reverend Mother in her school to a sour-looking cat, which was sketched in a postscript. This reminded me of how I and other people were playing a game in which we would describe the profile picture of the person who left the last comment. One person said a gloomy man, I believe, about mine, and that affected me, for I wanted to have a bit of fun, not misery. Alexander Walker wrote that Vivian bought an exquisite wooden painting with money Lehoman gave her to buy a refrigerator. If the story is true, it may relate to me suffering when my father sold his mother's apartment for the fraction of the price, and some portion of that money was wasted on alcohol. But he also bought himself a car, TV, a tiny house, and also a motorcycle for me. And I think that they needed to buy the refrigerator so that they could cool down the milk for Suzanne, their baby. From what I know, Vivian disliked Charles Lofton's gross body. She said she felt she could never get near enough to him. It's actually very similar to how Vivian's heroine in the movie Sidewalks of London feels about Charles' character, and she never pays the penalty for the thoughts she expressed in the movie's story. I have some asymmetries in my body. While I was said to be beautiful looking as a teenager, over the years I've changed in my appearances. Some people clearly didn't like how I now looked. Vivian and Larry sailed for home from Wellington on 17th October 1948. Vivian probably had the manic phase starting to show itself, for she behaved quite hectically. The charades led to Oliver needing to rebuke his wife for humiliating him by making up to one bold young man a bit too publicly. I'll note that 75 years later, on 17th October 2023, I decided to tell my mother about me being Vivian Leigh and Michele Avila in my past lives. Then I remember how in our village my mother, when I was very little, was making up to Vitalik, a guy who was older than us by quite a lot. I felt awkward and unsure at the sight, and the looks of smiles at me from my village friends didn't help me either. If Oliver's rebuke did not have any results, meaning that as Vivian I didn't suffer for my behavior in that episode, then the episode with my mother was probably the suffering for that error. In case with my mother, the reason for that episode was also in certain psychological problems, which are now gone, I'm happy to say. Generally, in my Vivian's life, I've had mental problems which impacted other people too. In my current life, there were several people with mental problems around me, and their lives did impact mine also. I found several possible interconnections between my past wife and my current one in regards to those problems. I mentioned them in the document I'll show you at the end. When Vivian was with Jack Merrivale, she at one point went off with several men who said that they were seduced by her beauty. For the first time, she didn't include Jack in the invitation. Marina in the village once had several guys flock around her, and I was excluded. Both Vivian and Emil Hamilton's daughter were, during a certain period of time, left without their mother around. I remember how one day, when I was a little kid, my mother took me to my father's apartment and left me alone at his door. She went away. But I started to run after her and cry and beg her not to leave me. I followed her in tears for many minutes and through many streets in front of many people's eyes. Eventually, we drove together on the bus to our house, and that was it. I'll mention that I lived separately from my father in this life. In my Mrs. life, father also left the family after a certain point. Laughing at Caesar's bald head in Caesar and Cleopatra. There's also a hint on prediction of death of Vivian and Michele in that film. It looks like I had to experience baldness for the first time living in my current body. It's been years since I learned to be more or less okay with how I look. Face reference in Sidewalks of London. I've already mentioned the issues I've had in my life with my appearance. My facial expressions were also influenced by my problems during the low periods of my life. There's also a possible reflection in Vivian's character being a pickpocket, thief, and me having to deal with scammers who took my laptop for repairs. But there were no repairs at all. And then they demanded money I didn't have to give them. They say that Vivian in The Village Squire played a rather snooty roles. Snooty means showing disapproval or contempt towards others, especially those considered to belong to a lower social class. It's interesting because I was at some points in my life in a reverse situation. I certainly belong to the lower part of social class as far as materialism is concerned. Gone with the wind. If I have to lie, cheat, or kill, as God as my witness, I shall never be hungry again. This could have a certain connection to why in Michele's life I was lied about, cheated, and killed. The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. The scene with the blonde character that Vivian Leigh played in the movie, who, as we assume, is killed by the man who cuts her throat. I've had 3 dreams ending the same way. The first had theater theme going. The second showed a blue car which might as well relate to my past life of Michele Avila. 21 days together. The accused innocent man has heart attack. I've got problems with my heart. Then he's believed to be the murderer, but he's innocent. I'm not believed by many people, it seems like. Psyche, or psychic body, is part of our astral body, and so it never dies also. From what I understand, as we live, our psychic body gets filled with data, and the data influences our decisions and behavior during certain situations. Since our psyche doesn't die when our physical body dies, the data recorded in it stays with us when we are reborn in a new physical body and live a new life. People from Xiaoba made it very clear that psyche is very important, mentioning that it's in the area of psyche that, on Earth, our greatest problems exist. Right now, many people take care of their physical body, and Xiaobin said it to be a serious mistake. If the psyche is poor, it will influence the physical appearance accordingly. Since psyche is immortal, we may be reborn with psychological issues that we didn't get rid of in our past lives. I should mention that people also have astropsychic body and psychotypical body. Since I've only recently discovered my 2 past lives, I wasn't able to make any solid theories or attempt to categorize the psychological similarities I found existing between my past lives. So, they may relate to one of those 3 bodies. Some say Vivian Leigh had sex obsession. In this life, I thought the same thing about myself. Only it had to be masturbation due to many reasons. In Vivian's life, I had manic depression, signified by mood swings. In this life, I've had highs and lows which would replace each other. I was depressed, but I managed to find the reason for my problems, and so I also found the solution. In Vivian Leigh's 1939 screen test for Gone with the Wind, I noticed that I, Vivian, turned my head and eyes in that video in similar way to how I sometimes still do in my current life. It should be noted quite a few of people do that. Scotty Bowers. Vivian said to him it was wrong and asked to leave, but then changed her mind. I did a similar thing but in different situation, when I'd leave the groups about movies and TV shows, and then I would change my mind and ask one of the admins, Venera, to add me back. This happened several times. David Nivian says that Missy, as he called Vivian Leigh in one of his books, hurried him endlessly to play hide and seek. In my childhood, there was a silly moment when I'd beg my village friends, who were older than me, for many minutes, if not an hour, to play, I believe, hide and seek, or another game with two teams where one has to catch the members of the other. I did play hide and seek with my grandmother in her two-room apartment when I was little. I was afraid of needles to various degrees in at least my three wives, Vivian Leigh, Michele Avila, and myself. And in my current life, and in my Vivian's life, I used to show signs of fear regarding some doctor appointments. The director of Look Up and Love movie, Basil Dean, wrote about Vivian in his memoirs. She was so uncontrollably nervous that for a while she seemed unable to take direction, a circumstance for which I made insufficient allowance. I became impatient. It was also said that Vivian was shaken during some other important moments of life. This describes me during several moments of my current life. Vivian was, at one point at least, thinking too much about reputation and what was written about her in newspapers. For me, it's been difficult at first to reveal the truth about my experiences with people from another planet, Seoba, because of what I was afraid some people would think or say about me. Romantic experiences seem to have mattered equally, both to Vivian and me. The negative way both Vivian and I dealt with losing at certain games matches up. Vivian and I are quite fastidious. Vivian and I have made impulsive decisions in our lives. Both Vivian and I share the love for gardening and nature in general. Also, this may relate to spiritual knowledge more than to Psyche. Vivian said, "Every single night I'm nervous. You never know how the audience is going to react. I used to be, and sometimes still am, nervous, thinking of something I want to write to someone, for example. In school, I was often nervous thinking if I was going to be asked a question. Stammer was the reason for that." There's material knowledge which gets erased when we're reborn, and there's also spiritual knowledge, which we get to keep in our astral body for the rest of our lives that will live in this universe. The importance of spiritual knowledge is that as we get more and more of it, we make less and less errors. And that means that we have to suffer less and less. For example, when we say that a person has high morals, it means that person has gained some spiritual knowledge in his past. In our case, spiritual knowledge is another important element, which can show if you could or couldn't be a particular person in your past life. There are at least 2 points to consider. First, what spiritual knowledge a person had in his past life must be present in his current life. Second, if the person has spiritual knowledge in their current life, but there's evidence that they didn't have that spiritual knowledge in their past life, there must exist an event in or between those two lives, during which the person has acquired that spiritual knowledge. If all the findings you get match those 2 points, then it's possible that you could be that person in your past life. In this regard, I've also found many matches between my current life and my Vivian Leigh life. I'll mention the examples of lack of spiritual knowledge also here. The very first thing I'll mention is the fact both Vivian and I, at the very least, believed in reincarnation. Of course, I know it exists now. This is very important, and later I found out I knew about reincarnation at least in the first century. That is, in my past life I lived during that time. John Gielgud said that Vivian barely talked about her depression or ill health. In my current life, I've talked about those things only when it was necessary. John also said Vivian was always enormously interested in everything: people, places, changes of fashion, and she had friends of every different sort and kind in London, in her country homes, in America and Australia. The things mentioned do relate to me too. Vivian and I are impatient and headstrong people. We both want some joy out of life. And Vivian said that Scarlett O'Hara had more courage than she'd ever have. I've already mentioned that I had to go through a lot before I could start not giving a damn about people's opinions about me. But not always so. There's been other indicators that I lack courage in certain other situations. Vivian hoped she'd never have selfish egotism. I've tried to help a village friend who had bullied me previously because of my stutter. I've also been sharing self-book and my experiences and what I learned in my life with other people, despite the fact it gives me nothing material or monetary. In Vivian's life I was restless and had to be doing something. I'm still the same. As Vivian I said, big picture contracts are good financially, but I advise young actresses to think twice about them. I agree with that statement. In fact, I remember how when I was dreaming about linking my life with movies, I thought that I don't want to have much more than I need. Vivian said, "The snag in success is that the nearer you get to it, the farther away you feel yourself to be. The world may call you successful, but in your heart you know that you never fulfill your own hopes, which is perhaps all to the good, for complacency is a fatal state, so a very pleasant one, if you can remain in it. I never can. Whenever I let myself feel thrilled and flattered by the approbation of other people, self-criticism rears itself, like a snake, at the back of my mind and destroys the illusion. Not surprised that I agree with old self, because that's the way I pretty much am too. And there were moments when in TPXP group I was called genius by some people, but I knew it's not so, even if it can be pleasant to be sort of like that. But I know myself, and I know that I've yet to learn a lot, and then some more. Vivian said, "So that is the first and most important lesson that success has taught me, to beware of self-satisfaction." Following the above note of mine about self-book, there were times, of course, during which I felt very happy that I know the truth. But I was cautious for the feeling not to get to my head. I was cautious to concern myself only with facts and truth. Vivian said, "They gave me that flexibility of mind which is so necessary to an artist, and taught me, I hope, understanding. Through knowing them, I have always been able to recognize the characters I played, and love them. I think that I am understanding as well, sometimes being able to as if feel other people's lives and situations." Vivian said, 16 years have passed since that first time of the mask of virtue, when success came so suddenly that I distrusted it. I do still, but it no longer seems so important, for I have learned many things since then. One is that to live, in the fullest sense, is worth more than to attain any material reward. Again, I see the point. In Vivian's life, I would wear gloves to hide the pores. In my current life, I had to wear a cap to hide my balding head, until I was okay with how I look, more or less. Vivian says she'd prefer a smaller house. Me too. Vivian, I act because I like trying to give pleasure to people. Interesting, because it may be another reason that, despite of the skepticism and casual hate towards me, I still keep on going trying to spread the word about celibacy. It can help people greatly. In a way, it's pleasure related because people's lives would become easier and so more pleasurable. Vivian, I am innately religious, but not in the church-going sense. I say my prayers and I'm a Catholic. I like the broad range, which is what the word Catholic means. I like a great variety of people and things. The last sentence clearly defines me. My views on many adequate religions, each having some truth in them, but also some unfortunate distortions. So, we have to have knowledge to be able to weed through the false data in those texts. Vivian about Brando. He used to say to me, "Why are you so damned polite? Why do you have to say good morning to everyone?" And I'd say because it is a good morning, and anyway, it is a nice thing to say. So why not? I say hi even to those people who are rude to me. Perhaps not always, but I try to. Vivian's feelings about Hollywood. She wrote to Leigh, all their standards are financial ones. And to her mother she wrote, I know I could not stay here without worry. I should go mad. In the manifesto chapter of my free ebook Simple Truths of Life, I mentioned how society could live without money. Selznick didn't cast Vivian to play in Henry V as Catherine. They say that Vivian, while remaining always friendly, never felt quite the same about Selznick thereafter. Again, this is me. I have several people I try to remain friendly with, but I don't feel the same about them after the things they did to me. Vivian usually was on time for rehearsals. I try to be on time too. I'd rather be a bit early than late. Both Vivian and I like independence. There was a moment in Vivian's life when she played a game, the name of which I will not pronounce, but it relates to the lack of certain spiritual knowledge, which I have evidently not had until a certain point in my life also. Vivian would have her curly hair straightened fairly often. I've had periods when I had curly hair and was teased about that fact by two school chums. I actually bought a hair straightener, but it was faulty, and I decided to just refund it and never bother about my hair again. Vivian was not paying attention to the fashion, and was wearing the clothes that suited her. It is similar to my tastes and views on what I want to wear. During my research, I've encountered many more synchronicities present in my two lives. For now, I use the word synchronicity, but I feel like a direct link could exist between many of my synchronicities, meaning that the existence of the first synchronicity played a role in appearance of the second synchronicity in another life. But for now, it's not very clear what causes that, or how exactly this phenomenon works. It concerns a woman by an alias Laura Black, who one can see in P-movies. The thing is, I've been interested for quite a while exclusively in the girls who didn't do a lot of BG scenes, which does not describe Laura at all. There was just something about her that was drawing my attention. You'd think it had to have been the looks. And it was absolutely unusual for me to return to watch more scenes of the woman I ended the past session to. This was some time after I had the dream saying I was Vivian Leigh. I was actively searching for proof it was a true dream and I was Vivian Leigh. And so, I discovered Laura also called herself Vivian in some of P movies she was in. I don't want to give her more credit than required, so I won't go into the details. But you have to understand that, as weird as this episode may seem, it was actually very important at the time. Much later, there was another episode when I had to go to certain websites again, after the wild imagination working together with the sexual drive got the better of me. Out of the blue, one of links led me to a video on a P website, and in that video, for some reason, there was shown Laurence Olivier's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It was ironic that I had to be engaged in that particular activity because of the mistakes that I made as Vivian Leigh, and some of them were done while being married to Laurence Olivier. Needless to say, there's almost zero chance of happening to come across a P video showing Laurie's star, when you're clearly searching for different types of material. Unless, of course, I was called Vivian Leigh in my past life and Laurence Olivier was my husband in that life. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Vivian played Titania, who had fairy wings. It's a synchronicity with a young woman, Katya, who was drawing fairy wings onto the photo of herself. We met in Sokolniki Park. There are certain similarities between her and myself. Many years ago, I was driving in a bus to my father. There was a woman standing near me and reading Gone with the Wind in English. It was probably the first and only time I could read a book along with someone in a public transport. And I did read some sentences. Saul told me there are other joys in life in a telepathic message. Joy by John Patu was my main perfume in Vivian's life. I assume that it was Saul who said look to me when the clock of the tennis match I was watching displayed 33, and Vivian Leigh appeared on the cover of several Look magazines. Sidney Carroll said, I took a big chance, but I just knew she was the one. A lot of other people claimed they discovered Vivian, but I was the one. I have a great knowledge of palmistry, and Vivian reluctantly let me read her hands. She was ashamed of what she called her paws. After that reading, I decided the role was hers. I was a bit surprised to read this because 3 times the palmistry played very important roles in my life. The Mask of Virtue made Vivian known. It was an important play in her life. In July of 1957, Vivian was campaigning against theater closures. That same year, she loudly protested in the House of Lords against the demolition of the St. James Theatre. She said later in her dressing room at the Stowe Theatre that when she spoke, the peers did not move a muscle. Sadly, the history repeats itself, and I see a similar thing happening with Seulba. Not many help me spread the message, even when I show telekinesis is real, having learned the basics of it. Not many people move a muscle, it seems. I also shared recently my latest discovery, that you can ask your higher self to show you some truth in the dream. It's how I was able to have many more true dream confirmations I was Vivian Leigh. And since the answer was always accurate, since then I also discovered many of my other lives I lived before being born as Vivian Leigh. And yes, when I looked into those lives, I discovered synchronicities and other types of connections with my current life, and with my other lives too, confirming that I was indeed those people my higher self told me or hinted I was. It is a separate topic, so. Then I found a photo of young Vivian. What caught my attention is the fact there's a figure to the right of me, and it looks like someone wearing a fedora. Reminded me of Freddy Krueger and my synchronicities with A Nightmare on Elm Street movie. There's another photo showing a shadow of my Vivian's hand, and the way the fingers positioned once again reminded me of my synchronicities with that movie. As for its synchronicities, Vivian did dress as a clown once. She also used it instead of she, her, in her diary when writing about young Suzanne, her daughter. And in Alexander Walker's biography of Vivian, there's a photo caption that says it instead of she, when clearly referring to Vivian Leigh overexerting herself in this royal variety performance with Oliver and John Mills that brought on another miscarriage. It's of interest, of course, to note that both movies would exist many years after my death in Vivian's life. Yet, there's still a possibility that I have synchronicities with those movies in that life. Actually, the numbers 14 and 28 are present in what certain people say about my past life of Mary Magdalene. It's possible that what those people say is wrong, but it's a synchronicity regardless. My mother wrote in her diary on December 14th, 1991, that I played a theater at home. I remember almost nothing from such a young age. I was 3 years old then. From what I know, it's rare for children to play as if in a theater at home, so I find this a very good connection to my past life. Then they say that at one point the tiniest pinprick of a pupil were visible in Vivian's eyes. It's of great interest to me because in my current life I had episode when my pupils were so tiny that they almost weren't visible. You could see only iris, and maybe you could distinguish a tiny speck in the middle among the iris's black wavy lines. During that time my sight was as if very light, to the point I couldn't feel my eyes. So light they seemed to me, almost non-existent. It's difficult to explain. I had to see an eye doctor because of that. Their eye drops enlarged my pupils to the large size, and after that, I've never had such tiny pinprick pupils. I don't know what was the reason behind me having such pupils in my two lives, but it is one of the connections between them. There's a mountain of other synchronicities and other possible connections to my past lives, but I can't make this video any longer. So, in the end of this video, I'll just show you all of my rough and almost unedited notes, which I made while researching my past lives. If you're someone who is interested in reincarnation, some of the information I present may be of value to you. Having said all that, what are the chances that I have all these synchronicities, similarities, movie reflections, errors, and clear matching suffering for those errors? Almost identical psychology. I had two true dreams plainly stating that I was Vivian Leigh, and I've also had other dreams in which I either was Vivian Leigh or it was hinted that I was Vivian Leigh in my past life. And yet, despite all of that, I wasn't Vivian Leigh in my past life. For me, it's literal zero. I will briefly say my thoughts, foreseeing one question some people will ask. Why I don't look and don't sound like an actor, if in my past life I was an actress who won 2 Oscars? I think I've already answered the part of the question concerning appearances. I made errors in my past lives and, according to the universal law, I had to pay the penalty for them, living in such a body. As for my voice, actually, when in school I started to talk perfectly and I was confident, I would read with expression in the literature class. It was like I lightly played the characters. And when I was watching movies, I would pay attention to the way actors were playing their characters, their mimic and mannerisms. It so happened in this life I was destined to experience a different life, as you know by now. So I have never trained my speech or acting abilities. It's one of the reasons I don't sound the way I did in my past life. Then, and I don't wish to return to this topic again and again, but these are facts, I have certain problems related to my health, sleep, and the environment of the place I live. All of that also affects my voice. I think that in my videos you could notice how I sound differently, sometimes better, sometimes worse. English being not my native language in this life is also a factor. It's also important to note that I don't read fictional books here. I simply share my knowledge with you. I don't need to be an actor to do this. The life path of my soul gives people an important lesson to learn from. Nobody can be spared from suffering for their errors. It doesn't matter who you are or who you think you are. The universal law is the same for all, and it's working perfectly. You can be an Oscar-winning actress in one life, and you might start stuttering in another life if that is what your payment for the error should be. In one life, you're a skillful scammer, and in another, you're the one who's the victim of scams. There can be many examples. Life will find a way to teach a people a lesson. This is the time for me to say goodbye and show you all of my current findings.